All right, welcome back to the channel. So it looks like the boxing gods are looking out for us. Jermall Charlo, the unified WBC, WBA, and IBF 154-pound champion, has been called out by Golden Boy's own Patrick Teixeira, who holds the WBO 154-pound for a unification fight and a fight for undisputed, a rare and beautiful thing in boxing. But to add to it, Patrick Teixeira says he would be happy to end Jermall Charlo's career. Man, you funny, but make the fight happen. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. So, why is Patrick Teixeira versus Jermall Charlo important? It is important because it is what we are looking for in the sport of boxing, at least what we say we're looking for in the sport of boxing, an undisputed champion in a weight class, something that is like a unicorn. You hear about it, but rarely, if ever in your life, see it. And when you do see it, it's usually just a jackass with a horn glued to the top of his head, because they ain't never going to defend it, and it doesn't really mean anything. And that, I mean, in the fact, like Alexander Usyk, who never defended his status as undisputed, and well, Terrence Crawford, I think, meant a little bit more, but he was undisputed for a whole 5 minutes. True undisputed with Jermall Charlo, if he was able to beat Teixeira, could create a situation where we really do have a guy that will be at that weight division and defend that title multiple times. So the idea that Teixeira would call out Jermall Charlo, for me, is just, it's tremendously exciting. And I certainly hope that happens. The boxing gods work very hard to make sure that undisputed don't happen, through sanctioning fees, through just people flat out ducking. So it's good to hear that Patrick Teixeira is saying that he would be willing to go ahead and get that done. Now, because the last three WBO 154-pound champions, you ain't heard a peep from when it comes to the PBC, that being Jaime Munguia, Saddam Ali, and before that, for a brief amount of time, Miguel Cotto, who I do believe beat a Japanese dude or something to get his hands on that belt. But it's just, for the most part, it's been an absolute trash belt. So people really haven't been pushing hard to get the person to hold it to fight, the person that holds the other three belts, or the people that hold the other three belts. Up until, just a minute ago, it was between two. But now that Jermall Charlo has cleaned up his side of the street, and if he's able to fight Teixeira, the winner of that should be considered one of the best fighters in the world. And I think that is a very, very good thing that Teixeira called him out. Now, the problem that Teixeira has with making this fight, and he said it in his statement, was that, hey, if the WBO will allow me to fight Jermall Charlo now, and then put off Brian Castano, I'd be willing to do it. So that means that if there's a WBO mandated fight, that Brian Castano would have to step aside from that mandatory challenge to allow Teixeira to fight Jermall Charlo. Now, I don't see why that would be a problem for Brian Castano, because if Brian Castano lets that fight happen, then he would be fighting for all four belts when he fights Jermall. Or in the really crazy outside, ain't never gonna happen in a million year chance that Patrick Teixeira beats Jermall Charlo, then he could be fighting Jermall Charlo. So I would see that the WBO would allow, but that Brian Castano would allow that to happen. The WBO allowing it to happen, hey man, why wouldn't you? Because these are two PBC fighters that are going to be fighting Teixeira regardless. Now, obviously, the biggest hurdle to this, I think, is Oscar De La Hoya. That would be because Teixeira is a Golden Boy fighter, and Oscar De La Hoya does not have the best track record for working with the PBC and having his fighters fight PBC fighters. If you recall, we are looking in, especially when you're talking about Charlos, okay? Because there is a certain PBC fighter, Canelo Alvarez, that has been avoiding fighting a certain PBC fighter named Jermall Charlo for about 4 years now. So I think that has a lot to do with the relationship of Oscar De La Hoya to Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Al Haymon. If you recall, Al Haymon and the PBC, Floyd Mayweather Jr. and Al Haymon, which was Mayweather Promotions, and formed the PBC, but they were partnering with Oscar De La Hoya with Golden Boy, and Golden Boy thought that they were signing a bunch of fighters, but it wound up that they weren't signing the fighters. The fighters were actually signing with Al Haymon to exclusive managerial and advisory contracts, and he didn't have them signed. So there was that whole lawsuit thing that kicked off with Oscar De La Hoya suing Al Haymon. So I don't know whether or not Oscar De La Hoya, who knows full well Patrick Teixeira is going to get mopped, okay? Knows full well he's going to get mopped. Just like he knew his fighter before that, Jaime Munguia, was going to get mopped, right? Jaime Munguia was going to get mopped. And Patrick Teixeira is going to get mopped by Jermall Charlo, and I just do not see these guys wanting to make that fight. But if there's enough peer pressure on it, then the fight can happen. Now, what happens if Golden Boy or Oscar De La Hoya or somebody else says, no, we don't want to make the fight? The WBO says, no, we can't make the fight, which, I wouldn't like to see, but it's boxing, so you can't be surprised. So what would happen if they don't? Well, from what I can see, it's a good situation for Jermall Charlo either way, because Brian Castano is a PBC fighter. Brian Castano was a guy, I do believe he was the WBA, at a point he was the WBA regular champion. I think he fought for the WBA regular championship against Erislandy Lara, who was holding it, and maybe it was a draw during that fight. But I know that Brian Castano fought Erislandy Lara to a draw, which tells you that, Brian Castano is definitely a difficult fighter, a very solid 154-pound fighter. And if Teixeira fights Brian Castano, man, I would pick Brian Castano to beat Teixeira as well. Teixeira got the championship by, I do believe, in a vacant fight, in a fight for the vacant title against Carlos Adames. And Carlos Adames is kind of a blown-up 147-pounder, decent fighter, maybe had, 13, 14 fights, something like that. Southpaw, was helping Mikey Garcia, one of the guys that was helping Mikey Garcia get ready for his Errol Spence Jr. fight, Carlos Adames. I do believe Carlos Adames is a top-ranked fighter out of the Dominican Republic, and one of the people that I thought would eventually wind up fighting, or there was a chance that he might fight Terrence Crawford, and quite honestly, he's still a potential future opponent for Terrence Crawford. However, like I said, Brian Castano has all the ability in the world to beat Teixeira. I wouldn't be surprised at all, and I would. Matter of fact, I would favor Castano in that fight. And if that happens, then you have, since it's a mandatory, I do believe it's the mandatory for the WBO, or it's been mandated by the WBO, then there should be no rematch clause in it. And if Brian Castano gets past Teixeira, then Jermall Charlo can fight Brian Castano for undisputed. So any way it goes, man, it really looks like there's a chance to get undisputed, with either it being a situation with Brian Castano beating Teixeira, or Jermall Charlo and Teixeira just getting it straight on after that. Now, if this unification fight takes place and Jermall Charlo wins the fight, let it be known that this is the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world. He has all four major areas of the scoring criteria of boxing. All four of those areas: clean and effective punching, effective aggressiveness, ring generalship, and defense. He has them all in spades, and he has executed it at the highest level against one of the deepest divisions that there is in boxing. And if he is able to unify all the belts in one of the deepest, hotly contested divisions in all of boxing, You got to give that dude his pound for pound status because then nobody else doing it. Nobody else is clearing out divisions, right? As much as you like Canelo Alvarez and want to speak highly about Canelo Alvarez because he's an excellent fighter, he's not clearing out divisions. He's ducking out of divisions. And that's just what it is. He's not, like, 160 is his weight. He's not fighting at 160. He's a 160 champ that has no intention whatsoever of fighting the WBC champion or fighting the WBA champion, or the WBO champion or the IBF champion. So the fact that Canelo Alvarez is at 160 but refuses to fight any other champion, dog, you got to get that dude out of there, man, when you have Jermall who's knocking off everybody. But anyway, that's my take on the matter. I'm certainly hope Teixeira gets his wish. As far as him ending the career of Jermall Charlo, really not worth the conversation. And that's my thoughts on the matter. You let me know what you think. Thank you guys so much for supporting the channel in the Patreon as channel members, in the live streams that we do for non-live Monday through Friday and Sunday mornings. Thank you guys so in the super chats and the cash apps. Thank you guys for holding the channel down. You guys make it go. And with that, I'm out. Peace.